Truthful Tuesday. This is going to be a four-parter, so it's a bit of a long video, but you can see it in the four parts anyway. So, for Truthful Tuesday, I spoke last week about the problems of New Age spirituality. This week, I'm going to speak about a subject which I've asked people to message me, and I'm going to talk about this. It's misogyny versus misandry. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about what misogyny is, what misandry is, and the problems of why people use this term. Does it actually exist? And misandry and misogyny, how it can be countered in culture and society. Misogyny. So you hear a lot of people saying, you're misogynistic, you're misogyny, that's the case of misogyny. And this is, I'm going to put, it's a definition because there's a lot of people talking a lot of shit about what misogyny is, and it isn't that correct. So, misogyny, the actual the concept of this is a hatred or prejudice against women or girls. And it's seen as a form of sexism used to keep women at a lower social status than men, thus maintaining the social rules of patriarchy. Now the word patriarchy, if you don't know what that is, patriarchy is a male-dominated society. A female-dominated society is called a matriarchy. Okay? So misogyny has been widely practiced for thousands of years. If we look at most history books, and it's reflected in art, literature, human societal structure, historical events, mythology, philosophy, and religions worldwide. Now, if we look at the idea of misogyny, if we look at the ancient texts, most actual of the gods, though we see God as a male figure, in a lot of actual texts which are from, say, Vedic texts, or even in some of the Abrahamic texts, they do exist female prophets. They do exist female goddesses. There was queens. There wasn't just kings. So this is a problem we see a lot of. And the thing is, misogyny is the violence against women, domestic violence in extreme forms, and we can even see femicide is actually an issue as well. Misogyny also operates through sexual harassment, coercion, and psychological techniques aimed at controlling women, or legally or socially excluding women from full citizenship, in some case towards accepting an inferior status. Now the other thing is, with misogyny, it can be understood both as an attitude held by individuals, primarily by men, as a widespread cultural custom or system. Sometimes misogyny manifests in obvious and bold ways. Otherwise it can be subtle, disguised, or we call microaggressions. So the original idea of misogyny as a word was actually created from the 17th century from the Greek misos, hatred, and gun, meaning woman. The word was rarely used, and it was only popularised by the second wave feminism in the 1970s. The issue with all these different things is people have different ideas of what misogyny is. So with the idea of misogyny, it's a sexist prejudice and ideology. Now, in the idea of the world we want to be in equality, misogyny is seen as the worst kind of breakdown of not going towards equality. However, if you look at a workplace and people want to not have misogyny, or they want equality, that means there should be equality. And the trouble is, to create this in a utopian idea is very difficult. So the issue is has misogyny got worse or has it got less? Well, according to figures, there is now more women in employment, which is getting the same as men in the roles. Now, is the pay the same? According to some figures, yes and no. Trouble is, figures are also doctored. So again, if we're looking at figures, are these figures doctored towards an agenda or a narrative? So we have to look at this in a bigger scheme. Now, when we're looking at the idea of misandry, misandry is a hatred or contempt or prejudice against men or boys. So men's rights activists and masculine groups have characterised modern laws concerning divorce, domestic violence, conscription, circumcision, and the treatment of male rape victims. So, for example, if we looked at the idea of if someone has a divorce, and the courts in general, for many years, it doesn't always equate to this, but mostly they will go to the female role model, the mother, for looking after children. The man will have to pay out alimony or child support or so forth. The man doesn't have much say in this in the court of law. Now, when we look at this, people would say, well, that's fair, you know, the man is the breadwinner. But then if you want to have misogynistic attitudes, then the attitude is that actually, if you're supposed to be looking at an equality society, it's what does provide a household. So we get into this about, one, laws, ethics, morals, and societal conditioning. So many are not liking the idea. Sociologists, anthropologists, and scholars of gender have countered that misandry is not a cultural institution, whereas misogyny can be. It's not equivalent, and they reckon it's not equivalent to misogyny. However, it is a growing issue. So, for example, if we look at domestic violence, the most thing is in the stereotype and assumption is if domestic violence happens, it is usually assumed it is a man committing violent acts towards a woman, or could be another man or a child or so forth. Now, that assumption is based on societal conditioning. Now, is that saying that that's misandry, that we treat the man, that every man who we hear in domestic violence issue is the perpetrator? And this is where we get into these arguments. So the idea of misandry is, again, formed from the Greek word misos and andra, which is andros, man. The misandrous, or use of that term, again, really can be found firstly in the 19th century, and it's only now people are talking more about it. So men's rights literature and academic literature has now become more about the growth of anti-feminism. Trouble is, this again becomes about a role of what people think is fairness. So the idea is now is an issue is you will hear people ridicule if someone comes up with a rape allegation, and people will go, there'll be men saying, believe them, believe her, and people will think, there'll be men who will say, not all women can be trusted. Again, these are stereotypes, right? Because there could be just that example of where that is an issue which is in their lives. But you see, there's also the other side of it, which is that if you've got a hatred for men with the misandry, is then you can also be that people will go, yeah, well, that person always, if you hear about rape, oh, that person is always acted very sexual. So I would believe that is true. All without due process, all without legal proceedings. And the issue is as well, this is what's caused the issue of misogyny and misandry, is the law itself. The law itself is flawed. The law itself is flawed through many reasons. For example, if you look at the actual cases of rape, the actual cases of women who actually get a man who's been accused of rape actually gets sentenced is very low. We're talking like out of most cases, I think it's only like 2 out of every 20 rape cases actually goes to prosecution. And out of them, 2 out of them 20, probably only 1 of them gets an actual prosecution. So that actual person gets a custodial sentence. Or some things, it's also hard to prove according to the way the law works. So we have this issue of not only people using misogyny in the incorrect term and misandry in this idea of an unfairness, but it's also about how every individual case has to be looked upon. Now, if I look at it being a therapist, most of my clients are female. I would probably say 90% of my clients are female. Now, for me I couldn't work within that and say they would be, I don't think many people would say I'm a misogynist. I don't think. Maybe people do. But there are certain roles, I think traditional roles, which are needed. So, for example, this idea of now, there's a lot of this uprising of people saying to not trust women. This idea of women who get pregnant and then they reckon they blackmail or emotionally blackmail the man to provide for them. And all these things, again, they're all conditioning. It's all linked to conditioning. It can be down to the place they're from. religion is also a big ethical issue around that, and the morals of that. So we have to look at, why is this an issue? But the one thing I would like to say, and I think is very important, is just because someone calls someone a misogynist, it doesn't actually mean they are one. And you can't just throw around words like confetti that they mean something. So for example, there are certain words which people could see are very similar to the word misogynist. We have the word chauvinist, chauvinistic person; sexist, bigot. We have a cynic. We have a naysayer, right? And then the idea is now we should be, if we're living in this world, we should be optimists. We should look at the idea that the more we look towards an equality of society and fairness, it would work. But the trouble is, what people are afraid of is, and this is a deep down fear, is that because men have treated women so badly over the time period of history, is now if women take charge in jobs, bosses, companies, is that the men fear that women would become misandrous. They would treat men badly. And the other thing as well is, if now we are redefining what is a woman, what is gender, sex, this changes things as well. So we have to look at the other side as well. We've got also this other problem. It's not only with misogyny and misandry, we've also got segregation. And this is a subject I'm going to talk about in another couple of weeks. Segregation is an issue where people now are trying to segregate people for not only their sex or their gender, or whether they're female or male or whatever they ascribe to, but we're now also looking at that not only of the caste system, of race, we're looking at that of class, we're looking at what type of job you have, what type of property you have, what you do, what you say. And the other issue as well is that people will use the word supremacists as well. This is another word people use, which also links to the idea of misogyny and misandry, because supremacists is the idea someone thinks they're supreme or better than someone else. Well, if you are a misogynist or a misandrist and you believe you're better than the other sex, then you are no different to a supremacist. And you are xenophobic. It then also goes into other religious problems as well, because people can then have stereotypical views based on assumption of what people are like. So if you want to know about that, you have to look at assumption and understand that post I've shared here before. And looking at the assumption is that we have got to remove and question our beliefs. So, and just as a last example, I'm going to leave a video of the example of where someone uses the word misogynist and it's inappropriately used. Because in fact, when the person who is being accused of it asks the person, how am I a misogynist? Explain what the term is, and they can't explain it. As much as people say that if you misgendered someone or you call someone the wrong pronouns, calling someone a misogynist, a rapist, all these things, when they are only allegations and not actual convictions, is a big problem. And in my opinion, as much as I'm an optimist, I do look at that if people do not understand the meaning of certain words and they're just throwing them around, we can get into a really big problem in society, because we can now get people's careers, livelihoods, and it also could mean their families are split up due to stupid allegations which, unless they're proved by the criminal court system, and the criminal court system needs a big reviving, it really does, rehaul completely. And that's not just the UK, but America and elsewhere. So, again, going back to the argument, misogyny versus misandry, if you want to use them terms, please know what you're meaning. Just because someone says they don't think you can do something doesn't mean they're a misogynist. And if you think that a man is, all men degrade you, doesn't mean they're, you don't have to be misandrous and actually be horrible to all men, because not everybody's the same. We are all individuals. And it's very important to understand this. Any questions, any ideas or anything you want to discuss, I'm more than happy to. But I do think that people need to keep using words incorrectly. because it is a problem and it can cause a lot of harm. It can actually destroy people's lives. Allegations is not proof. Calling someone a word with no proof is not good in my book. I think it's actually, to be honest, it shows a lack of intelligence and it shows a lack of education. Till next time.
He's just like a man.
You just seem very misogynistic, realistically.
Yeah.
What is misogyny? Why are you using words that you don't even know the definition of?
No, that's not what I meant.
I think you are misogynistic, though.
But what does misogynistic mean, though? Like, just so I know what you're calling me.
Okay, so the reason I said it is just, again, based on the